Hi everyone, and welcome to the webinar today. As Jodie said, it's ADHD and Autism Navigating the Teen Years. Well, I'm happy to say I've got 3 children and they're all past those teenage years now, but I've been there and I've been on that journey. Raising a neurodivergent teenager is challenging, so just to take a minute and acknowledge the journey that you're either about to go on or that you're fully in at the moment. So I am the trainer at the ADHD Foundation. I work in the parenting team. And I just want to take a moment to think about being neurodivergent is a different way of experiencing the world. It isn't a deficit. We're all about strengths-based approach at the ADHD Foundation. And with that in mind, we're going to just summarise. We're going to have 30 minutes, as Jodie said, 30 minutes of content, and then an opportunity for us to answer some questions. So if you've got any questions or things that you might be going through at the moment, you could do with some advice. Hopefully we can answer a few of those. And if you have anything you want to, comments, complaints, even compliments is what I'm looking for, you can email us at the ADHD Foundation at that email address. So a few sort of housekeeping before we start. Be constructive, focus on what you can do right now, not what you can't do. Try and have that growth mindset. Reflect, you know a lot already. You are the experts on your young people. You've known them probably for the longest time. So be reflective on that and know that you are an expert in your child's journey. Be open to changing your mind and asking questions. Be open to consider different ways of thinking. Be positive. You are on that journey. Maybe you're at the beginning of that journey. You might have a primary age young person and they're just about to transition into secondary school. But we are on the journey. We are going to be talking about ADHD, that co-occurrence. So just to put your mind at rest if you are thinking about that. I've just been told that the volume is extremely quiet, so I'm going to try and pop my volume up before we start. Volume okay for everyone? Okay, have a look at your settings on your phone. I think everyone can hear quite well. This is not a quick fix. We're not mechanics and your young person is not a machine. I suppose it's guidance and some ideas and some practical strategies that you can take away and try. Be aware of any impact that learning today might have on you and your family and share those ideas. And remember confidentiality. If we're popping in the chat, let's not use names or anything that can sort of identify where you are. So we're going to be talking about ADHD and autism and characteristics within that period of time, adolescence, and co-occurrence, so how ADHD and autism may overlap and differ during adolescence. And then some challenges that we might face supporting our child and young person, academic challenges, emotional challenges, sensory challenges for those teenage years. So have a minute, you can pop in the chat if you want to, but just sort of rate yourself at the moment. What is your understanding of the challenges for neurodivergent children and young people with ADHD, autism in their teenage years? We're going to have a real mixed bag. Some of you might just be right at the beginning of this journey and you might not have too much of an understanding, or we've definitely got some experts on this webinar. If you have a neurodivergent child, one of the things that you end up doing is becoming an expert. So where you are at the moment. So I'm going to show my age a little bit now, but just pop in the chat if you remember Kevin the teenager. You might have seen this scene. If you haven't seen this before, you can go on YouTube and find it. I'm not going to show it. There's a lot of yeses here, yeah. So Kevin the teenager, it's his 13th birthday. He's a lovely, happy boy, bouncing around, very excited to get the toy that he wants for his 13th birthday. And then he morphs into Kevin. And a lot of people, yeah, you are all remembering it. And Kevin just overnight just turns into a bit of a monster actually for his parents. And his parents are so surprised. They're like, what has happened to our beautiful little Kevin? Hormones have taken place. Yeah, so have a little look at that. Remind yourself of how quickly that transition happens. So what's actually happening for young people, those teen brains? Well, the first thing for neurotypical teenagers and neurodivergent teenagers, we are beginning to become self-conscious. We are beginning to be aware of us. We're not just that individual who isn't really aware of how we are perceived by others. We start to have that self-conscious mindset. We're also going to have emotional outbursts. So those outbursts are going to start to happen, and it can be that dysregulation in emotion. We might become sensation seeking. We might be looking for things to stimulate us, excitement. And with that, we may be taking risks. We might start to take risks or not think about the consequences. Many of you will probably have seen the hand model of the brain before. We have the amygdala, our safety mode, fight, flight, freeze, and then we have our prefrontal cortex. That's all our executive function skills that we need. And as we are developing this part of the brain, this prefrontal cortex is still switching on and developing. It takes up to the age of 25 for it to be fully developed. And then if you're neurodivergent, add another 30% onto that. So we're starting to take risks and we're not fully switched on. So if you think about that, brain's not fully developed and switched on yet. It's totally understandable that we will be taking risks and not thinking about the consequences. And then we're going to be pushing boundaries. We're going to be pushing boundaries with you. We're going to be pushing boundaries in our social groups. We're going to be pushing boundaries in a school setting. Because really, we're growing up, aren't we? We're starting to understand how we fit in the world, how the world works. We're not just thinking about being ourselves, being looked after. Now we're thinking about our impact on the world. So this is a natural development. But with individuals with ADHD, there are some areas of challenges with that. So first of all, we've got executive function challenges. So we may have challenges with planning, organisation, time management, and this becomes much more apparent when we get to this age because we're getting increased academic demands in school settings. When we move to transition to secondary school, there's going to be lots of transitions to different teachers, different subjects. So our working memory will be challenged. And we'll have challenges potentially with prioritising and task initiation. So starting that homework or starting that assignment might be challenging. We've also got challenges with attention and its dysregulation. So ADHD, I like to think of it as attention dysregulation rather than attention deficit. So difficulty sustaining attention on non-preferred tasks will be there. Or we could hyper focus on high interest activities, think about Xbox and Minecraft, that kind of thing, or particular high interests. And we'll often hear that misunderstood comment, well, they can focus when they want to. It's not about that, it's about dysregulation. We've got an increased distractibility in stimulating environments. So think about the size of a secondary school and the changes in there. That distractibility is going to be much more apparent when we get to secondary school. We're also going to have emotional dysregulation. So we will have intense emotions that might seem disproportionate. Think about that, Kevin, and amp it up a little bit if you have ADHD. Emotions can be disproportionate. We might ruminate over things for longer periods of time. We'll have difficulty managing frustration, disappointment. And if you pop in the chat, has everyone heard of the term rejection sensitive dysphoria? This is an extreme, yeah, a lot of people have. So this is an extreme, it's dysphoric in nature. So it could be a perceived rejection or reaction to a small rejection, but it's a heightened emotional response to that perceived rejection. And then we've got impulsivity, so that risk-taking behaviour, they're going to increase during adolescence. We're not thinking about the consequences, and with ADHD, this is going to be really challenging. So speaking without acting or impulsive comments without thinking is going to have implications in social groups and social settings. So this impulse control is there as well, especially during adolescence. So a few people, rejection sense dysphoria is not a diagnosis. It's a lot of people with ADHD will say it's probably the most disabling part of having ADHD. I personally have ADHD myself, and I can agree there. Have a little look at rejection sensitive dysphoria if you haven't heard of that term before, because it's really going to start to play a part as your young person is going through adolescence. So let's move on. So we've got autism in adolescence. So autism in adolescence, there are going to be some challenges with sort of unwritten social rules that become more complex in teen years. So difficulty reading sort of non-verbal cues and body language can be challenging. We're going to meet a lot of new people. We're going to be much more many more environments to actually deal with that social communication challenge. We also have that literal interpretation of language, so we may struggle with sarcasm and idioms, so we really need people to understand that with our social communication. Sensory sensitivities are there, so we may have heightened or diminished responses to sensory input, so we could be hypersensitive to senses such as sound, textures, lights and smells, or we could be hyposensitive, where we're seeking sounds, textures, lights and smells. We could also have challenges with interoception, so the ability to understand what's going on inside our body, and think about adolescence and going through puberty. There's going to be sensitivities there. Sensory overload can happen in those busy school environments. You know, you think about a big secondary school with 1,000+ students, that's going to be a lot of sensory input for autistic teenagers. So we'll need lots of sensory regulation to cope with that and manage that. We also have a need for predictability, so preference for routines and structure. We need that to feel safe. And we will potentially have anxiety with unexpected changes or transitions, so we may need some support with that. We are detail-oriented thinkers, so that needs support as well. With individuals with autism, we also have deep knowledge in specific areas of interest, so we have those, we call them special interest or restricted interest, and we'll be passionately engaged in those special interests. However, we might have difficulty engaging in topics that are outside of our interest areas. So we need to consider some of these areas, and the overlap, the co-occurrence, which we're going to talk about now, can be quite contradictory. So there can be two things at play, and we need to find that balance, and that is thinking about your child as a unique individual with a unique profile. I'm just reading one here. My son will do things without thinking, almost automated, and then has no recall on what he's done when asked. But when you ask him about rejection sensitive dysphoria is strong, he's genuinely convinced he's done something, but he has. How can I help him manage this? We'll try and answer some of these questions at the end. I'll try and do my best to answer as many as possible. So let's move on. So co-occurrence is the rule and not the exception. So we're going to look at a few statistics here. You may have seen this before if you've watched any of my webinars before. I'm fascinated with this. I always find this really interesting. So co-occurrence is the rule and not the exception. So it's highly likely that your child or young person may have co-occurring conditions, and they may not be diagnosed. So autism and ADHD, up to 78% could have that dual diagnosis. Autism and dyslexia, up to 51%. And autism and DCD, developmental coordination disorder, also known as dyspraxia, up to 85%. So it's quite interesting, isn't it? We may have that one diagnosis. Maybe we have a diagnosis of dyslexia, but we don't have a diagnosis of autism. So I find this fascinating. So individuals with ADHD, up to 45% of those young people will also have dyslexia. ADHD and dyspraxia up to 53%, and ADHD and tic disorders such as Tourette's up to 33%. And if you have a diagnosis of dyslexia, up to 48% of those individuals will also have dyscalculia. Dyscalculia and dyspraxia up to 44%, and tic disorders such as Tourette's and ADHD up to 82%. So it's really interesting that we have this co-occurrence being the rule and not the exception. The statistics have come from the ADHD Foundation, Stephanie, so we can have a little look at those. We use them to highlight that co-occurrence. So with ADHD and autism, we have that term that many of you will probably have come across, ADHD. So that's an individual who will have those two diagnoses, ADHD and autism. So key overlaps with that will be executive function challenges. So for executive functioning, both conditions struggle with planning and organisation and that flexible thinking at times, and transitions can be challenging for both, but for different reasons. Social difficulties, both will have challenges with peer relationships. ADHD, we may understand social rules, but our impulsivity, we might get it wrong sometimes. With autism, we may miss social cues or unwritten rules, but both conditions, we could be quite vulnerable to, when we think about secondary age, we could be vulnerable to bullying or potential, situations where we get it wrong, or we may get bullied for that. Sensory processing, both will experience sensory sensitivities, though typically more prominent with autism. Sensory processing co-occurs with both conditions, and it can lead to overwhelm in busy environments. So think about transitions in hallways, cafeterias, sensory processing of smells, sounds. That can be challenging for both ADHD and autism. Emotional regulation is going to be one that both conditions will have that overlap. So both may struggle with that, managing those big emotions, and potentially we may appear immature compared to our neurotypical peers. And we have a 30% emotional developmental delay. So if you're talking to an 18-year-old, they're potentially emotionally at the age of 11. It doesn't mean to say that won't develop and happen. This is not a development impairment. This is just a delay. So often you'll hear secondary school teachers saying, come on, you're year 10 now, you should be more mature now. Actually, there's a 30% delay, and we need to be aware of that, because emotionally we may have big emotions because we're struggling with that. So think about that when you're supporting your child and young person. So key differences in terms of social motivation. So individuals with ADHD might often be socially motivated, but they'll struggle with the execution. We may have a sort of hyperbolic, big lies sometimes. You'll often I've been a student with ADHD, and I often used to try and fit in and tell these little lies to try and fit into social groups, but often got it wrong. With autism, we might have different social needs or approaches to friendship. So potentially we've got different motivations for social connections. Communication style, ADHD, if we are that impulsive, hyperactive type, we might be interrupting or we get distracted and go off topic. That can be quite challenging. With autism, we may need more precision in language. We'll have difficulty with back and forth conversations. So think about those friendship groups when we get to secondary school age, that might be quite challenging. And our cognitive profile, ADHD, that dysregulated attention and difficulty with that sustained focus can be challenging with our education, our academic studies. With autism, we might have great focus, monotropism on those special interests, but we may struggle to be more flexible, and that can be really challenging in that academic environment. So motor differences, we may have motor planning difficulties with autism. That's a high number of co-occurrence with dyspraxia. So think about PE lessons or navigating environments. That can be challenging. With ADHD, we could often be, if we are that impulsive type, that we may be restless, we may need to do some constant moving, we may need that dopamine uptake and have to have regular movement breaks. Autism, we also may be stimming, we may need to do that movement, but we may be masking in a school environment, so that can be quite challenging. So challenges in adolescence, we're going to talk about the areas that will be challenging. Hopefully we'll come up with some strategies that you might be able to take away. At the end of the day, when we do these webinars, I want you to go away and go, actually, I'm going to try that. I'm going to give that a go. As a parent, carer, we really want practical strategies, don't we? So the first part would be academic challenges. So we're going to have increased demands on executive functions. So we're going to have multiple teachers, we're going to have multiple classes, homework is going to be much more included. We may have long-term projects that might need some planning and organisation, and we may need to note take while listening. That becomes a bit more critical. The content of our learning becomes a bit more abstract. Reading comprehension demands increase, and if we have dyslexia, if it's not diagnosed, that's going to be a lot more challenging. And we are going to need to put some things in place to support us. So I've come up with some strategies that you could use. So at home, I'm sure many of you already do this, but we might need to have a specific visual schedule for your child or young person, especially in a secondary education environment. You can help your young person by breaking down assignments with them. So you're not doing the work for them, but you might need to help them break it down. So chunking that assignment down so we can help them actually compartmentalize what needs to be done. So the other one, assisted technology for organisation, I've shared with you, I'm going to go on to it now, a really good tool called Goblin Tools. Can you just pop in the chat if you've seen Goblin Tools before? Oh, brilliant. There's a few yeses and a few no's. Well, just to help you, I've just popped in here an example of a potential assignment that maybe a year 8, year 9 student may have. So starting with the conversation taken from Act 1, Scene 7, explore how Shakespeare presents Lady Macbeth as a strong female character. So that is a really big piece of work for young people. How do we chunk that down? How do we actually break that down? Where does your young person start with that? So in Goblin Tools, you can pop that in. And then what it does, which is amazing, it breaks things down into steps. So it can tell you what to do. So it's a bit of a tick box. So I know, yeah, Sigrid, it's amazing. So then we get even better with this. So we start off with, okay, break it down. But then if you need a little bit more detail, you can break it down even further. So if you see on the right-hand side, I've highlighted it, you can break down the item. This will really help. And we're not doing work, we're not taking work from AI, we're not doing anything like that. This is a tool to help children break down what needs to be done. And it can be as simple as get ready for school. If you put get ready for school in the top of that, it will break it down into sequences. How do I get ready for school? 1, brush your teeth. Well, do we need to break that down? We can break that down. It's amazing, fabulous tool. So hopefully if you can take anything away from this webinar, you can take Goblin tools. You're welcome. So, yeah, Rebecca, I could have done with this for my uni assignments too. It's amazing, the technologies. It's free. Yeah, it's absolutely free. Go and have a look. No, it's free. You goblin.tools. It's absolutely free. There is a teacher version and you can have a little look on that. But let's keep on task now. Have a little look in that in your own time. But let's go on to social challenges. So social challenges, the landscape's going to get a little bit more complex. We've got subtle social cues and there's going to be some hierarchies in secondary school. The understanding of friendship evolves, and part of the development of teenagers is about finding out what's okay, what's appropriate with my friends. So friends, especially females, they start to get really nuanced and subtle, and we can get a lot of sort of rejection sensitive dysphoria around being rejected from friendship groups. We also have, as you know, social media complications, and we need to support our young people with that because that can be really challenging. It's also hard to develop a sense of self if we're masking who we are to try and fit into that social group. So finding belonging whilst being neurodiverse is really challenging, and understanding our own differences can be really challenging. So we need to be thinking about self-advocacy, how to build those skills for our children, young people. It's called goblin.tools, Yulia. I've popped it in the PowerPoint so you can have a copy of the slides and have a little look yourself. So practical strategies for this is hopefully the school that your child and young person will be going to will be able to identify that your child, maybe you've got an EHCP, but there'll be social skill groups specifically for teenagers. So working on the skills needed to be in social groups. I'm hoping that you can find that with your school. Think about contacting Sendias with a Slack group, have lots of resources that you can find there. Also finding compatible peer groups through their interests. So if they have a special interest, my nephew has ADHD and he really loves Sea Cadets, and that's his special interest. He's very much involved in he's very interested in sort of tanks and military, and it's his special interest. So he goes to Sea Cadets and he gets to explore that. Thank you, Amanda, for popping that in. So finding compatible peer groups, things that they, on the app, I don't know, online it's free. So the app is different. So have a little look think about their special interest and go with it. I can only share with you my own experience. When I was a kid, my mum let me take apart a Commodore 64. I'd like to think now if I was in school, I'd probably be into coding and sort of technology. So I'd like to think there would be a peer group. There wasn't in the early 80s, but I'd like to think there's a peer group now that I would have been able to go to and find my tribe, so to speak. And then you've got direct teaching of those hidden social rules. So think about social stories. There's loads out there that you can look at. So it might be coming up with scripts on how to deal with challenging situations with friendship groups. My scripts or my line that I would always use with my children and for myself is, those who mind don't matter and those who matter don't mind. So that is Dr. Seuss, but it's a good script. It's not a social story as such, but it's a reminder of actually putting things in perspective. Those who mind don't matter and those who matter don't mind. Yeah, books, there's so many out there, but it's so good to teach those hidden social rules. So then we have emotional regulation. So that identity, as we're forming our identity, the risk is that we might be masking who we are, or we don't get to fully explore who we are because we're trying to fit into the sort of society. So we are getting a growing awareness of differences. We're processing potentially our diagnosis. If we get a later diagnosis, maybe just as we transition to secondary school, we might not be fully okay with that. We might not want to take medication. Medication has its own sort of challenges. It's got its pros and cons. But we are vulnerable to anxiety and depression. Hormonal changes, which I'm not going to be able to get into today because we just don't have the time, they will amplify those emotional responses. But we may potentially become perfectionists and fear of failure. So we may have that fear of being found out, of being neurodivergent, so that we've got that increased emotional intensivity. And we may not have that emotional literacy to communicate how we're feeling, or we might not have the interoceptive awareness of what's going on inside. So how can you as parents help your young person? Well, it's about developing that emotional literacy. So zones of regulation is used in many schools, but it's something that you can use at home. And it's about modeling that as well. All feelings are valid, and it's about having an awareness of that. There's lots of cognitive behavioural techniques around regulation and being aware of what's going on for them. So you could look into sort of CBT techniques. And then we have self-regulation practices. So with the zones of regulation, I'm feeling sad. What can I do to help me when I feel sad? I'm feeling dysregulated. What can I do to help me feel dysregulated? So have a little look at some practical strategies. Think about emotional literacy. Think about CBT techniques or strategies, and think about self-regulation. What do you do when you're dysregulated? So then sensory challenges are going to be heightened. So we've got one of the big ones is the changes in the body. And we can have quite big challenges with hygiene, can't we? Hygiene expectations plus sensory sensitivity. So we may not particularly, showers can be painful for some neurodivergent children and young people. And so we need to be mindful of that. So working a way of managing that is about really knowing your child and thinking about that. But we do have hygiene expectations, and there's going to be changes as we go through puberty. Could have challenges, toothbrushing. So we could look at non-flavored toothbrushing. It could be brushing without the toothpaste, if that's an thing. There's so many things that we could do. So we also have that sensory issue with the noisy school environments that can be really challenging. There's also increased social pressure around sensory issues. So peer pressure regarding clothing, food choices. If you've got, periods is going to be a huge one. Sandra Cooey, coming out of Amsterdam, does a lot of work on hormones and the female presentation in ADHD. And that's a whole nother webinar, so I can't really go into it. But if you want to look at Sandra Cooey, she's got a lot of information there. So what can we do? So really we need to think about regulation throughout the day. So it could be that your young person has a sensory diet that they have throughout the day. Cooey is Kooi, Sandra Cooey. We might need to put things like accommodations, or give your child or young person accommodation. I have I'm just going to hold it up there, the loops for myself. If I was going to the supermarket, I would have these. These are really subtle and thank you. They're really subtle, and they could just be the make or break navigating around a school. So the loops are little ear defenders. You can get a sort of Amazon version. I'm just going to hold them up. They look like little ear defenders, but they fit into the ear, and they don't cancel out all of the noise, but they can be, I don't lose them because I have a little box for them and I put them on my lanyard, but yeah, you can lose them. So think about some subtle accommodations that you can give to your child. So it's not necessarily ear loops, loops There is a brand called Loops, but you could get a different version on something like Amazon or Team, that kind of thing. But you need to support your child to think about things that they can do, and give them that self-efficacy. So if I'm feeling that the sound's too loud, I can use my loops. If I feel like I need a break, I can ask my teacher for a break. Or if I'm at a family event and it's a bit too busy, and I can say to my parent carer, I need a break, I need to go. So it's about managing those sensory needs. So there's so many challenges with the sensory input. So we could be hypersensitive or we can be hyposensitive. And again, for the time that we've got in this session, I can't really go too deeply into it, but we need to think about all of the senses and that unique profile for your young person. Just a reminder that sleep is so important, and now your children and young people are going to be probably staying up a little bit later and wanting to get up later, and that's part of their circadian rhythm, which is going to be starting to change. But really consider sleep. It's difficult with screen time. I would always say lead by example. If you're on your phone and your screen, you can't possibly expect your child or young person to do what you say, but not as you do. So think about yourself and your own screen time. Nutrition, you may have fussy eaters, but consider nutrition as we go through puberty and adolescence. There's a high number of individuals with iron deficiency, ADHD. It can be really challenging. And movement's so important. Try and get, even if it's a walk around the block, try and get some movement in the day for your child or young person. So top tip, pop in the chat if you've seen this. TJ Power, he's got a book out called Dose Effect. Has anyone seen this before? There's quite a few no's. I highly recommend it, especially if you're going to have a teenage young person in your house. So basically, DOSE is an acronym for the things that every single person needs. Now, TJ Power has ADHD, and I think this book is so good for parents of children with ADHD or autism, but also for young people. He has an audio book. I listen to his audio book, and it's brilliant. Dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins. We need these 4 things every day. So have a little look into it. It's an opportunity for you to explore. I'm going to move on quickly. Have a little minute now and reflect on this quick session. Do you feel like you've got a little bit more understanding? Do you feel like you know a little bit more? Give yourself a bit of a rating about that now. I'm hoping there'll be some increase for you guys. So ADHD Foundation, we're the largest ADHD charity in Europe. We've got loads of resources on our website, so go and have a look. There's a few websites that you can have a look at there. And also our resources, we do have some ADHD for parent booklets, etc. Have a little look on our website. So I just want to say thank you for listening to me. I have spoken probably a little bit longer than I meant to. Oh, thanks, Belinda. I've got 10. Questions. I'm going to pass on to Jodie, and Jodie can give me some questions to answer if that's okay.
Okay, thank you, Colette. That was a brilliant presentation. You've given us some really great advice and strategies this morning. We've had a lot of questions submitted today, and our first question is, my 10-year-old daughter starts high school this year, but is highly anxious about growing up and says that she doesn't want to. I suspect it links to her fear of death, which also makes it harder for her. Do you have any advice?
It's really challenging. I think one of the risk factors of neurodivergent children at risk of emotionally based school avoidance is that change, that transition and fear of change. Some things that we could do is you could potentially ask school to, a lot of schools do this now, a video walkthrough of the environment. make sure you access as many transition days as you can. There should be a team that will be working on that transition, especially if your child or young person has an EHCP, so they'll be very much aware of that transition. It's acknowledging that fear and that anxiety. Remember, that anxiety potentially could be a demand avoidant profile. So that demand avoidant profile, which is often written as a demand avoidant profile on an EHCP, it's not a choice if they don't want to do something. They're in fight, flight, freeze mode. This is actually a fear of an actual, I need to keep safe. So I'm not using my rational brain right now. I'm actually in fight, flight, freeze mode. I'm using my amygdala. I think there's a bear in the room. So we need to consider that and support them with that. There's lots of strategies that you can do to support them with that, but conversations need to be not one-to-one, face-to-face, maybe explore with groups. So you could actually look at maybe going to visit with a friend. So if she's got a friend that may be going to the same secondary school, that might be good. Driving past the school and looking at the school, looking at pictures of the school can be helpful. Is that use for you? I hope I've answered some of your questions there.
Oh, that was great, Colette. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next question is, my 14-year-old daughter has a diagnosis of both autism and ADHD. She lacks the motivation and struggles with energy on the mornings despite routines, screens removed, etc. She typically has one day in school and then can't cope to go in for another one. Do you have any tips on how to handle this?
Yes. So when we say emotionally based school avoidance or emotionally based school refusals, we use that term as well. Again, it's very similar. We are overwhelmed with the environment. It could be sensory, it could be the environment, it could be the academic demands that are placed upon her. Also, she's going through a huge transition, one of the biggest transitions she'll ever go through in her life, which is that movement from being a child to an adult. Hormones can have a huge factor with females. If she's hypersensitive to what's going on inside her body, that can be really challenging. Or if she's hyposensitive and she's not really got an awareness of the body, it's a complex factor. I think connecting with school and not feeling pressure as a parent and carer that, you know, it can be really challenging, can't it? You may have work yourself and that challenge when they're refusing to go to school. I think contacting support from your school, thinking about working together as a team. Please don't feel like, you know, you're being judged for this. Anxiety is a medical condition, and so you can, if you can't actually attend school, it isn't a choice if you are sort of emotionally based school avoidance. So have a little look at what school can do, talk to them about it, and then explore maybe sit with your child and think about what's not working. So think about sensory aspect, think about the academic challenges, and think about, I know you said taking away screens, but sleeping, if we've got disruption in sleep, you could maybe go to your doctor and talk about sleep. There's synthetic melatonin to help young people sleep. I mean, I could talk all day just about this, but there is support out there, but please don't blame yourself. It is part of the journey of getting through to adulthood.
Oh, that was great, Colette. Thank you.
Thank
Our
you.
next question is, we're really struggling with grandparents understanding our young person. They say she looks fine and is having us on. It's so destructive, and we find that we're getting more isolated from our family to keep our young person safe. Do you have any advice?
Yeah, it's really challenging, isn't it? It was like a different generation. You know, we've all had that experience, I guess, and many of us all have had on this webinar will have had that experience. Oh, they didn't have ADHD in my day. It's just naughty child syndrome and all of that. And it can be really challenging. I think your energy, I suppose it's best not focusing on that. My advice, someone told me, was, you know, if you look at two brain scans of a neurotypical brain and a neurodivergent ADHD brain, there's a marked difference, and science has come on so much, but a part of me believes that it's a waste of your energy to try and convince other people, and you've got to just make it as best for you as possible, best for you and your family as possible. There's lots of sort of advice out there on sort of you know, there's misconceptions out there, but really you can't really change an older generation's opinion on this. I think we have moved on so far. We are in a paradigm shift, aren't we? We're moving on so far now. So I would say my advice, one-to-one on a sort of personal note, is just don't waste your time with it. It's not going to change it. And I think, you know, it's about the next generation. We're hopefully in the future, we won't have to have webinars like this, because we'll be such an inclusive society, because we are so much more informed, that we won't need to have these challenging conversations. But I really feel for you. I've experienced exactly the same thing. It's really frustrating.
Oh, thank you, Colette. We've got time for 2 more questions.
Yeah.
Our next question is, does emotional maturity ever catch up, or will children always be delayed in this area? My daughter is 11, but emotionally she's 8 years old.
It will catch up. It's a developmental, emotional developmental delay, not an impairment. If you speak to any adult individuals with ADHD, it's usually around 30 that everything starts to switch on. I think with the rejection sensitive dysphoria, our experiences make us quite sensitive, quite emotional at times. And I think it's accepting that we're quite sensitive individuals, and that we are, that comes with a great gift as well, because we're very empathetic and we understand how situations can make people feel. But I do think we need to understand that it isn't an impairment, it's just a delay. We all grow at different speeds. We need an average to sort of measure, but we're all unique individuals. So feel confident. I've got my eldest son is now 26, and they're starting to click now. I'm starting to see that maturity arrive, but they were always quite immature in comparison to their neurotypical peers, which can be frustrated.
Oh, that's great, Colette. Thank you for answering that one so well. Our last question is, my 14-year-old seems to be retreating into a smaller and smaller world, doing less and less. He says he replays all social interactions over and over again in his head, and it's too exhausting, so he tries to avoid it. Do you have any advice?
Yeah, it's really challenging, isn't it? Because we've got to the point where we're isolating ourselves. And I have personal experience and lived experience of this situation, and it can be so frustrating as a parent, because the best thing for them is to get out, but I suppose it's that rejection sensitive dysphoria again. It's in the end, it's just too painful. So how do we support them with that? So it's about positive experiences. So our experiences determine how we feel, and how we feel determine our behaviors, and that continues to cycle round. So we need to have some positive experiences, and that positive experience could just be driving to the shops. So start off small, so it could be a drive into the shops and back. And if that's a positive experience, we reinforce that positive experience and we continue. If it's friendship groups, at the moment, we can't force a square peg into a round hole. So it's about finding their special interests and maybe thinking about exploring that. Also sort of mental health, like support them with that mental health, because it's quite easy to fall into sort of anxiety and depression. So making sure, you're speaking to your doctor and making sure you get support with that, and for yourself as well, because it can be really challenging. we do things to keep safe, don't we? We want to keep alive. That fight, flight, freeze mode is a natural thing that we're not conscious of. So at the moment, we're trying to keep safe, and that can be something that you can discuss and talk about the pros and cons of that. But it's about keeping that dialogue going, really.